Alright, so there you are. You come home late at night. The dishes are still unattended in the sink. The house looks like a mess. The trash is full. Voicemail light is flashing. And there's a stack of bills that have gone untouched. And nobody got the mail. You look down and shake your head as if you had hoped for some distant miracle. You look into the living room and you see your husband watching TV with his feet on the table. One thing leads to another. You perceive that you are not being valued and you're being ignored. A loud verbal argument develops and you simply can't hold it in anymore and scream, "Enough!" What's your first impulse when you pick up the phone? Please, by all means, don't fall right away for couples therapy as thinking, "That's exactly what I need." Sounds counterintuitive, I know. Don't get me wrong. Couples therapy can be a powerful intervention. However, it should be used as a capstone towards completing your time in therapy and should be saved for the very end, and typically is suggested but not required for growth in your relationship. In fact, getting your supporter in a room and letting them have it, or wait until the therapist sees what I have to go through, is likely to push him further into a corner and simply turn the therapist into a perceived referee. This logical but maladaptive style of thinking is pretty universal, and therapist's role in this situation goes against most people's natural desire to try to fix their partner. A lot of what I'm trying to say goes back to Therapy 101, which identifies that we do not and should not have the ability to control another person's actions. And generally doing so will cause a great deal of psychological distress for ourselves and possibly make the relationship even worse as we deepen the rift. While positive influences, also known as contextual influencers, can be positive, such as culture, environment, challenges, and the very people that shaped you into the person you are today, there are maladaptive or unhealthy versions as well. Imagine seeing a family member doing something that we know is unhealthy, such as smoking, hearing from someone we never want to hear again, such as a derogatory term, or are touched by someone that ends up hurting us, such as getting slapped in the face. What do you remember happening after being such a victim out of desperation? Maybe one of these sounds familiar: isolating yourself, excommunicating your supporter, doing less at work, exaggerating what your supporter did to you, or perhaps you even chose not to eat that night or stayed up in order to make your partner feel worse. What about using that red line as a potential weapon in your arsenal, or giving an ultimatum to your partner that you know will be partially implemented and rarely followed? These are all unhealthy responses when people desperately attempt to change someone else's behavior, despite how justified the reasons might be. In an average relationship, there are typically three responses supporters typically give each other. One, attack and defend, sort of like two politicians at their podiums not listening to what the other person is saying, in order to come up with their best rebuttal or defense. You think this practice is exclusive to politics? Think again. Do you see where politics gets us today? The second, avoid and deny. This means that some people twist the story of what had transpired yesterday to largely being in favor of themselves or lying to themselves enough where it didn't even happen. There are many reasons for this, perhaps the most innocent being that our brains automatically fill holes in our memory with probable outcomes. So, if hindsight is 20/20 and our brains take shortcuts filling the gaps since you can't remember everything, well, of course you're going to remember the story differently and travel down that river in Egypt called denial. Avoidance is typically a gender-specific trait. And stonewalling, which is considered one of the four horsemen of a failing relationship, is just the start. This can be when a wife is attempting to bring a case forward for her husband, using that dirty dish example, and the husband either continues watching TV or leaves the room out of frustration. The next horseman is defensiveness, where you become one of those butt heads again. For those of you that weren't watching last episode, those are the yes but responses we were talking about in the Stages of Change video, where such a statement neither concedes or acknowledges that any of your behaviors contributed to the problem. How about those times when we became all religious and began preaching to our spouse? They call that horseman contempt. Contempt can be a feeling that we are right in our argument and typically tend to be a little or a lot condescending to our supporter. The last horseman is criticism. This is perhaps one of the simplest to understand. If your problem is about Joe washing the dishes, make it about that behavior and don't start name dropping or psychoanalyzing your partner. The problem should always be the problem. And if you truly believe that people deep down are initially programmed to want to do the right thing, then you'll eventually understand that the person, him or herself, is likely not the problem. I'll pause for eye rolling right now, since this is usually where I lose most people. I know, the automatic reflex of wanting a simple answer you can point to. If you want to blame something, then blame what is really going on. Your system is failing. Think of a relationship like an engine of your car, and with age needs a little bit of maintenance to stay in shape. Your relationship is the same construct or idea. Chances are, when you first started dating your spouse, or when you first became friends with your supporter, things were arguably better and not worse, right? If they were bad to start with, then remember to call me for an appointment. Joking, of course. You and Joe Schmo created the problem together, exacerbated by many influences like stress, work, finances, kids, and the list goes on and on. Give your supporter, and especially yourself, a break, and some well-deserved credit in this situation. You watching this video right now is a sign that on some level you have an open mind, which is half the battle towards giving your relationship a tune-up. Some monkey wrench turners or interventions are those I statements that you've heard before that helps you call your opinions what they truly are. Your own perceived, subjective, and sometimes inaccurate reality of what's going on. Can't be right all the time. While at the same time getting off your chest what needs to be said. This method will seem less offensive to your partner and less confrontational. However, the real meat and potatoes of having a lasting and satisfying relationship will always have to do with how you respond to an emotional crisis event. Not for yourself, but of your supporter. For those of you that think you are always in control of your emotions, I'm going to burst that bubble right now and state that this is a misnomer or falsity that is a biological impossibility. A very simple way of understanding brain development is that our brains develop from the back of our heads to the forward sections of our minds that stop developing around the ages of 26 to 28. In the middle of our brains is the emotional brain called the limbic system. Further the most forward is our prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that processes almost everything that's going on. So if the physical wiring of our brain is like the integration of New York City, takes 2 city blocks to reach our irrational brain, and then halfway down the road during the first block, we stop at our emotional brain, well, guess what? Guess what science suggests? You react first and respond second. You can't and shouldn't always attempt to control your emotions. It's behaviors that result from those intense emotions that get us into trouble. All emotions have the potentiality to be good. They can be a call to action, reinforce the threat of our ordeal, and be a catalyst for change, making change come that much faster. Imagine if you didn't have anxiety, for instance. If that didn't exist, you wouldn't be here watching this video. So what can we do? Yes, we can decipher our triggers, plan for crisis events, do mindfulness exercises, and educate ourselves with tools and ways to identify how we are currently feeling. But the secret that no one seems to be mentioning is that a supportive relationship must always, always reciprocate. The concept is another no-brainer that we typically do not absorb towards fully understanding as a society. You are in a relationship because you, at one time, received some sort of benefit from it. It's as simple as that. If you are no longer receiving benefit from a relationship, well, guess what? You should not be in that relationship. When it comes to unconditional love and family members, you are welcome to torment yourself for the rest of your life. attempting to control the uncontrollable and attempt to hold on to that politically correct term that makes us feel good. But remember, people don't change because of other people. Your supporter will ultimately decide when change will happen. Not to mention, theoretically, unconditional love does not exist, since the fact that, for instance, your son is your offspring is already a condition set forth. You will unlikely go down the street, grab some random child, and treat them the same way as you would your son, would you? Are there unthinkable things a family member can do that would have you stop experiencing the emotion of love for them? Is the emotion of love 24/7 and never ending? If it is, then we call that a manic episode. And again, you need to call me. Lastly, for the topic of love, I have a handful of clients with very rare and horrific outcomes would state that there are just things people can do to make you stop loving them. It's one of those lies and high expectations we place on people, such as, "You must always be nice to me," which gets us into trouble. Typically, the transient emotion of hate is probably the most powerful with our loved ones due to the fact that we are emotionally invested in them. And when we get angry, our investment fuels the emotional fire which leads to divorce, which also ends unconditional love. With that said, if relationships rely on reciprocity, just how far should that give and take go? Does that mean with Joe, who had just lost his job and is punching holes in the wall, that you should attempt to give him a lecture on controlling his temper? Or does that mean that we should take a step down and realize that he's just reacting right now, while absorbing the notion that it is not about you right now? As I said in other videos, the anger hormone takes about 20 minutes to go away after the trigger has been removed. During that time, the person that is in emotional crisis is not in control, not listening, and will certainly say things that don't add up or are completely untrue. This is where it's your time to shine. Don't tell your partner, "Why are you acting this way?" or to calm down. Sit there and calmly try to understand the enormous amount of pain your partner is in right now. Yes, since this video has a large audience, I do have to remind everyone to call for help when things are starting to get out of hand. But chances are, for most people, that won't be necessary. Holes in the wall can be spackled pretty cheaply, and words will cut deep if you truly believe that they were intended for you. With that said, if your limbic system is fired up and you don't have a supportive spouse on the other end, that can be, for most American society, make matters worse. But we can't control other people, right? Only ourselves. If your relationship ultimately fails, and it most certainly can, don't you want to say that you did everything you could? That everything includes supporting your supporter in their most darkest hour, and fulfilling the oath you took if you became married. Taking a step-down approach, allowing your supporter to blow off steam, realizing that the person you are seeing is not at this moment your supporter, and embracing the notion that person who is your friend, family member, or spouse is currently looking back at you and is expecting you to be experiencing your finest hour, since you and not them can rationalize and understand what is currently transpiring. What are some things you can do to help? There are only two things that generally help in this situation. Give your supporter the space he or she needs, and more importantly, let them know that they are being heard. Verbally and non-verbally, attempt to place yourself in your partner's shoes. Show concern for your supporter. Let them know that you are not judging them and that you hear what they are trying to tell you. Maybe not verbally, but in essence. This could be with signs of affection, repeated witnessed emotions or statements of your supporter, and with relaxed and non-threatening voice tone and body language. Place your timer for 20 minutes, set it, and forget it. Serve affection once the emotional climate has reached room temperature. A better process for saving a relationship may include individual, group, and then couples counseling, but that's for another video. Stay tuned next week when we go over a potential next course of action for you, group psychotherapy, and personality profiles, and what they're really about. See you next time, and thank you for your support and for watching.